Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to also thank all the organizing team, the people from Acrux, entrepreneurship investment funds of the Southern Cone. I am very happy to be joined by two leaders of impact investments in Latin America, Carmen Correa, who's CEO of Mujer, one of the funds that invest not only in microcredits, but also in SMEs, most relevant SMEs, in not only in LATAM, but also at a global level. I know Rodrigo Villar, he is a founding partner of Adobe Capital and also of Yoon Ventures, and one of the leaders of this development in all LATAM. Today, we will talk a bit about the opportunities that this sector is presenting for the Southern Cone. Perhaps one that is taking strong strides, but one that is less developed in other countries such as Mexico, where Rodrigo is, and Brazil and Colombia. So I will just make a really brief introduction, and then I will give the floor to my colleagues who are the ones who know more about this topic. So regarding the impact investments in the region and their relationship with the importance of actually relating the private equity world with investment impact world, we've seen that in LATAM, the growth not only of that venture capital, but also investment capital go hand in hand. And it is so because, or it is more evident in those markets that are in better conditions for the development of venture capital. So we see that in the world, there are around $750,000 in assets under management that are being invested or seek to be invested with this logic. And this is being developed under different types of assets in different markets, not only in emerging, but also developed ones. And these $750 million, actually this figure is small after such a bizarre year such as this current one, where we have seen that more millions and also more interested stakeholders have catalyzed, and we've seen that LATAM is actually the third destination in investment destination. And we've seen that in LATAM there are two big groups, a group of countries that are more at the forefront and that have actually given strong strides to the consolidation of this manner of investment with the development of different funds. And aside from these being successful in their first rounds, they have also achieved their first successes, Adobe being one of those funds. And on the other hand, we've seen other countries in which, for example, we have those 4 countries of the Southern Cone that are just giving those first steps. We also see that the market conditions for the development of both venture capital. And so we see a context such as the one in Argentina, where the macroeconomic situation or the volatility of the market is favorable in the development of the sector. On the other hand, the high development of their entrepreneurship quality attracts investors, not only from private equity, but also from impact investments. So here we see that there are different conditions within these markets. In Uruguay also, it's highly revealing that the political and macroeconomic stability, also in Chile, the quality of their investment ecosystem, not only in investment markets, but also in private and public markets, make this region attractive. So we've seen how the countries have been the very first successful examples of endeavors of this type. And for example, there are some unicorns of impact investments that are being born in these 4 countries of the Southern Cone, as well as the experimentation with the first tools, the first funding tools that are aligned to the impact logic, such as the result contracts such as in Argentina and Chile, or for example, the development of the first investment funds, or that actually work or tackle some of the challenges that the market poses, and also some of the challenges that we are faced with this current situation that are being developed in these 4 different countries. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome both Rodrigo and Carmen, and we will be able to talk about some of the topics that I just presented. Perhaps the first question is for both of you, and I would also like to leave a space for you to give some words about the organizations that you each represent. The question is, how do you see from within the market both managing funds that are already being invested within this logic in this region? How do you see the opportunities that the Southern Cone poses versus other countries of the region where you're also operating? I don't know if Carmen or Rodrigo, who would like to start? Carmen, please take the floor. Well, thank you, Rodrigo. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you very much, Maria Laura, for this introduction. This is actually feeling as a very friendly conversation. So from Pro Mujer, this is our 30th anniversary. We've been founded with a logic of creating opportunities for all women in LATAM. We want to become a platform that can actually provide all the different tools and necessary resources to women so that they can actually reach their highest potential in their lives. Now, having said this, as you well mentioned, impact investment has allowed us to, or has developed in a greater way in countries wherein traditional investors or venture capital has already been more developed, meaning, and we call this Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Peru as well. And the Southern Cone was a bit left behind. However, as you well mentioned, we are starting seeing different opportunities, and there are different opportunities in different realms. Now, we also need to take note. Where do investors come from to LATAM? The investor of LATAM is mainly, or the impact investor came from abroad. So that basically led to the fact that this actually reached more consolidated markets where there were more opportunities, where there perhaps was a more solid or robust pipeline, where we also had some opportunities regarding the regulations that perhaps were a bit more flexible for these type of investments. Now we are seeing that LATAM investors are starting to actually observe this space, invest in this region, for example, with family offices or those people that have an important purchasing power that are already starting to invest. And this then leads to opportunities to other countries, hand in hand with also more innovative tools and instruments that can also guarantee a quicker exit, or actually guarantee an exit of that investment, which is actually one of the biggest challenges that the investors must face today at the moment of investing in LATAM. On the other hand, we also must consider which type of investment were they actually seeking, in which sectors were these investors investing. Also, for example, the timeline of these investors and investments, and that actually led them to decide over these countries. They obviously observe where, in which sectors are these investments concentrated. Microfunding, we have been subjects of this investment impacts. They can be agriculture, ticks, housing, and we also, or tickets, important tickets were sought. And basically, they sought for endeavors where the start of the organization was already in a development phase, that in which that were mainly present in these markets that I just mentioned. I think that what we lacked and what we still lack here in the Southern Cone is to further develop much more stakeholders to actually provide more information, involve different investors more, also be able to channel these innovative vehicle, call them social impact bonuses, or for example, pay by result projects. We must also share better practices. There are very interesting practices that have been developed in the region. And without a doubt, if we disseminate these in a greater sense in the Southern Cone, well, that will also develop or facilitate that more investors can reach this region. Actually, we also need to measure more. Something that we are also lacking is, or are different instruments and tools for better measurement. And I think that that is something that has just been recently carried out in the Southern Cone. And to the extent that this is further developed, that will allow us to have more investments towards these sectors. And lastly, but not less important, I think that what we also should carry out on what we need is perhaps unblock philanthropic capital that nowadays could perhaps be covering those first stages to be able to provide those guarantees so that greater stakeholders can actually, or greater investors can enter this space. Well, thank you very much. And actually, I think if you map what happened in other countries and what happened in Southern Cone countries, what Carmen just mentioned is actually what happened. It is the conjunction of those different factors: the access to capital, the access to, for example, patient capital, and the market conditions required to do that, and also an adequate measurement and reporting that can also visibilize what is being done and what is also missing. Rodrigo, you have broad experience investing in markets or countries that are more developed, specifically Mexico, Colombia, and you are starting to now see the Southern Cone. What do you see from your standpoint and your experience of years working with Adobe Capital Ventures? Well, I agree a lot with Carmen. I would like to tell you a bit about Adobe Capital Ventures. We started around over 16 years ago to work on impact investment. Actually, it wasn't called that at that time, but we tried to simply show and prove that you can invest and have an ROI and an impact at the same time, that these are not exclusive. And I think that is actually the thesis of Adobe Capital Venture, to be able to prove that private equity can serve not only to solve financial problems, but also solve social and environmental issues. Many years we've seen, in the past years, we've seen many names, but I think the impact investment is the name that has actually been coined by many people, and that has been able to gather many different other initiatives from other realms, such as philanthropy and different types of investments. We started over 16 years ago, and mainly we focus on entrepreneurs, helping them grow, helping them find funding channels. And that's where we realized that there was a need to actually create more different funding channels that were more adapted to our regions and our needs. And that's where Adobe Capital was born. Now, 8 years ago, we started to invest. We have around $50 million in assets under management, and we are investing in our second fund. The first fund was a fund of $20 million only for Mexico. And currently we have a fund of 30 million that is for the whole LATAM region. I think, so what are we interested in? in the Southern Cone, we see a lot of innovation that is not seen in other countries. I think that Mexico is a country that has a bigger economy. It's a country of 120 million inhabitants with a great possibility of carrying out business. However, I would actually consider this, and I feel that the Southern Cone has a capacity to innovate, specifically in entrepreneurship topics, that is significant. Not only are there a lot of successful entrepreneurs from that region, but I think that all the conditions are available. And what we've learned along all these years in impact investment is that we cannot just copy the models that have been working in other regions or in other geographical locations. We must really consider that although we speak Spanish in whole Latam, it is a very complex region. We have different legislations, we have different regulations. Therefore, it is not so easy. Now that we're starting this second fund with a regional focus, we must understand that each country is different and that each country has different rules, and that makes the whole process more complex. Now, to talk a bit about what we've done from Adobe Venture Capital, and to point out something interesting, is that we realized, specifically with impact investments, we generally talk about industries such as education, housing, health, financial inclusion. These are generally the more tangible topics that we must solve as impact investors as well. And in all these regions of Latam, these are great industries, and we see them with a business vision. For example, in Mexico, we are saying that we need around 7 million houses. And we can say, well, not all philanthropical activities and also public expenses can cover that need that we have as a country. So absolutely, when we have innovative companies showing us that this can be done also in a profitable way, that is exactly when this market becomes very attractive. Therefore, and if I talk about education, health, these are huge markets. And we must be creative and we must seek innovative matters to serve these different issues. Now, the problem that we see a lot in Latin America is that many of these industries, when we try to see this with a private equity or a venture capital lens, it is very difficult to find or to actually think that they will actually take this bet. For example, companies that, for example, do rural housing, these are companies that can grow. But nowadays, we can't really think of an exit unless we have a success of these type of investment. That's still something complex. Generally, these industries are still, even in the current times we're living as a region, we have a lot of populist governments. It's very complex because as an investor, you don't want to work with the government. You don't need support from the government to actually operate, but you need certain certainty, legal certainty and consistency. And that is actually very complex in Latin America. Once there is a change of government, there can be a benefactor that can change regulations or different, for example, subsidies can change. So this all makes the environment very complex to operate in the long term. What has actually worked well for us in Adobe Capital is that we created, or we're actually immersed in this topic that is called RBF, revenue-based financing, where we seek a mechanism where we can invest the resources of a company, but we don't actually have to be tied up to an exit. Basically, we have an equity multiple, and then the companies basically pay us through time, through a grace period, they pay us different quotas. But that has actually made it possible for us to have capital working and with different flows reach that exit, perhaps at a slower pace. Yes, you mentioned in the introduction you made that we have had several exits from Adobe Capital. That is true, but also the traditional investment funds have not had a lot of exits. They have had good investments, but there is not that secondary market. And I think that impact investment will also face this challenge to actually find these exits if we don't find different mechanisms. So I would actually think that in the whole of Latam, there is still a very big field to be able to innovate. And I think that we must adapt to the circumstances. Uruguay is a very small country, and if you don't start to think about an international exit, it will be very complex to actually think about how to transfer the venture capital model of Silicon Valley for such small countries and spaces. So I think that these are great solutions for the region. We've achieved to actually make the first investment of this type in Colombia. We're about to close the first investment in Chile. It has been complex because we've had to understand the different regulations, adapt our mechanisms to each place. But if all goes well, then we will close this. But we have taken more time, specifically because there is a time, or understanding all these regulations does take a time. But hopefully, before the end of this year, we can close this investment. And we are also progressing in making that first investment in Argentina, and would love to do this. But it has been about this. The mechanisms are absolutely different, and I think we must also take into account the risk that the region has. For example, we need to find mechanisms that work and that can allow us as an industry to grow. Because I think that technology, innovation, entrepreneurs, and markets are there. We must just be creative on how to package all that, and not just think that we must change everything to be able to change traditional investment capital. We must bring all the different financial mechanisms to actually seize all this. Yes, I totally agree. I think we need to adapt those financial tools, much of them coming from venture capital or private equity environments and from other segments, or the more traditional banking, the more traditional credits, to something that is adapted to the needs of the market, and also SMEs that are bringing solutions and that have a clear lens or a clear focus in impact. And then this opens up a space for the following question. My following question is for Carmen. Mujer is a fund that invests with a gender lens or perspective. So microfinancing is the strength of the organization since years, and now going through to the SME universe. So one of the ways in which a mainstream fund that comes from private equity or traditional venture capital can actually start migrating their impact logic. It's actually demanding a vertical, or perhaps a lens, a perspective that is more adequate to the interests of their SMEs, and then start to actually take that path to apply this impact lens with also a vertical that could be gender, education, health, and many other. What would you say to the investors and the GPs that are listening to you today, Carmen? How can this be done? How does it feel to invest in a lens in something specific, such as you as gender, with the gender lens? Well, we were founded with a gender perspective, right? And we are very known as a microfinancing organization, as you well mentioned, Maria Laura. We are now going to other sectors, but the truth is that microfinancing were developed in Latin America around the 90s with a main focus on women, of providing solutions and financial solutions to women of low income. So today, microfinancing is a consolidated sector, a mature one, sometimes even a question one, to be true. But the truth is that this same sector that has matured can also serve as a reference point, and that is a great reference point. The thing is that microfinancing organizations, well, we have our feet in the field. We know the needs, we know the actors, we know our clients, because we work very close to them. When we talk about investing with a gender lens or a perspective, what we're talking about is about incorporating or bringing about this gender perspective, summed as well to a financial analysis. And there we can convince, for example, such as New Venture Mexico. And what we did with New Venture was also develop a new instrument, a new financial tool under the name of Paiguala that brings this gender perspective to the table. So what I would like to invite you all to, and especially investors, is to incorporate this gender perspective when you invest, when you evaluate your investments. When we talk about incorporating a gender lens or perspective, or when we talk about investing with a gender perspective, basically what we're referring to is to invest in entrepreneurship that are led by women, investing in entrepreneurship projects that promote gender equity internally, investing in entrepreneurships and startups that can provide products and services to improve women's welfare, investing in startups that can promote the incorporation of women within their value chains, among a lot of other indicators. So basically, gender is cut crossing, and moreover, seeing it as a vector or as a sector, what, for example, can be done by housing or renewable energies, gender can be included and can also be part of this analysis that is being carried out. On the other hand, it's also important to mention that we can carry out an analysis in terms of how that company is today or that startup is today in this gender perspective, and also work together with them to improve those indicators in implementing some changes, be it, or actually perhaps making some commitments. And these commitments can be stipulated in the different agreements that we subscribe to be able to improve the percentages of gender equity that is within the organization. I think what is most important to highlight is that there are a lot, and I would like to extend this invitation, please research, but there are a lot of studies, renowned studies, for example, from McKinsey, that really show us and prove that those companies and those investors that are investing in these different gender perspective initiatives will reach very positive economic results. It's actually proven that the ROI and also the return over the assets is actually larger when we have entrepreneurship or startups with this gender perspectives. These studies also show us that if we achieve to invest with this gender perspective, we will be able to generate important changes even in the GDP of the different countries. For example, in Latin America as a region. And this will then also lead to a decrease in poverty rates and for economy to reactivate. So I think that is something in which I always say we don't have to do it because it's actually morally right. We have to do it because there is also a great opportunity, a great economic opportunity behind that perhaps we're not exploiting as we could. And it is actually an opportunity for investors. And I would like to invite you to join this endeavor, yes. And as there are different perspectives, not only gender, there are also different verticals that actually create a tangible result, such as medicine, telemedicine, biotech, or access to basic services and utilities. I think that's also a very interesting opportunity in the region. Rodrigo, Adobe is founded with a venture capital DNA, meaning it is actually venture capital with a logic of impact investment. And we believe from Argentina specifically, and from Uruguay and Paraguay and Chile, that venture capital as a type of asset today with private equity is a type of asset that can serve very well to incorporate this logic of impact investment. So within the DNA of Adobe, there is the whole theory of venture capital adapted, as you well said, to the needs of the different sectors or the different needs of the organizations or companies to which you're providing investments. So what would you say to the mainstream? What would you say to the mainstream of venture capital? How can they actually transfer from a very traditional logic where they only consider indicators such as ROI for the exits of those investments? How can they migrate from where they are today to be able to approach what Adobe does? I actually don't think that they have to migrate or think differently. I am convinced that the impact industries are the future industries. every time there is less water, less trees, we are living under an energy transition. The UK just announced that in 10 years they won't sell fuel, traditional fuel or petrol fueled vehicles. Therefore, we can see organizations that in their portfolio or funds that in their portfolio have different impact investment ones. I think how I differ ones is intentionality. From Adobe Capital, we always evaluate the companies before actually going to the financial indicators. We measure impact. So regardless of the fact that we like the market and their profile, if we don't see a clear impact, we just don't support it because that's not in our DNA. And I think that's what differentiates us from a traditional fund. However, we've invested in different operations in different traditional funds where we also coincide with boosting the market wherever the market of that company. However, perhaps they don't have that restriction or that intention that we actually have set for ourselves. However, I think that we are a fund that is focused and we have been focusing on a sector and we seek opportunities. In some cases, I believe that aligns us better with different entrepreneurs. There are many cases where, for example, the last investment that we carried out in Colombia, I think that this is the leading fintech company in Colombia. They had different traditional investment funds wanting to invest there, and they chose us as Adobe because there was an alignment of mission and of values, a very strong one. So I think that this alignment is important and considerable when you will have a partnership for several years. And I think being aligned and sharing values is very important. Therefore, I would say that the great differentiator from a traditional investment fund is intention, also values. And it's actually about finding perhaps or participating in several industries that are much more aligned. I think that's something important for this industry is that we each time see the PIS and different investors that want to actually invest in different impact investment funds. For example, in the case of Mexico, I think that an impact fund nowadays may have a broader world or possibilities of different investors. And I think that at least if there is not an ESG topic or how they are measuring impact, then that will be very difficult. Now, if someone has perhaps a harder DNA towards impact, perhaps they can find other type of investors that can be much more aligned with those interests. I think there are several foundations, also development banks that are interested in investing in investment funds. I think that has a plus in itself, but the plus with these investors that are attracted also leads to an aggregation of, or perhaps a different type of alignment of values and a different type of consistency in that mission. But I think that the range is actually pretty wide. We as Adobe Capital, we try to seek funds in the market. There are some funds that are venture philanthropy. There are different spectrums of what we understand as impact investments. Perhaps they are seeking lower returns. However, my comment would be the following. There is not really a difference, and hopefully all the different capital funds have that same impact. I think that's exactly where we can create that difference. With the very little funds, impact funds that we won't achieve that. Actually, I think we will achieve that when investment funds are actually the new normality. Yes, I agree. And I think bit by bit, this will be the new normality. And it's also the effect of COVID on financial industries. And I think that is being manifested, the acceleration of the amount of funds from the hardest mainstream that have launched, for example, an impact investment or that have announced it. Also, the performance that they had of the different funds that were cataloged as sustainable ones at a worldwide level. And this is, for example, measured by Bloomberg Morningstar. And these have actually overpassed the performance of more traditional funds. So we are talking about we're not really talking about what we're doing or how we're doing it. It's more about how we're progressing in the market. And this is done by the funds that you manage and many others at a worldwide level. Perhaps the last question, it has something to do with something you mentioned, Rodrigo. And perhaps for all of you who are part of this event, which are the sizes of the markets of the southern cone that compared to the giants such as Brazil and Mexico are a bit small. Not only with the number of inhabitants that live there, but also compared to market sizes, there are less developed markets, such as the case of Argentina and others. So many times the region is understood as a whole, as a mass, as a homogeneous mass. As Rodrigo said, it is not like that. So do you see if there is a possibility of having joint efforts to leverage the possibilities of attracting funds that come with this logic, with this impact logic towards the southern cone? Is it through the presentation of some joint investment opportunities that perhaps can echo that ticket, that opportunity? Or do you consider that this group, this 4-country group, is too diverse? I think that yes, I think that it's possible. Perhaps Rodrigo has much more experience on this, but I think that he has already shared some words about this. Also, his interest from Adobe to actually look at this region outside of Mexico. I think that there are great possibilities. And as Rodrigo mentioned, I think that there is vast innovation in the South. Smaller countries such as Uruguay, and I think it's also important to mention that regardless of the fact that we are small, we also have the advantage of actually being small, and because actually being an entrepreneur is actually more accessible. It can be less expensive. But at the same time, the entrepreneur conceives the startup to become an international startup. So with this logic, with this expansion logic from the starting stages. So I think that there are some advantages to being smaller countries. However, generating partnerships and being able to do this in a joint manner will, without a doubt, visibilize many cases that can attract investment and that can also lead to future investments in these countries. We're doing this, meaning we wouldn't have been able to develop an instrument such as the Bayuala by ourselves. We needed an actor such as the New Ventures to be able to do it. We just launched last year a fund with a gender perspective with Gender Impact, a Canadian organization. We were also able to do this because in an isolated manner, and we on our side and through our own mediums, that would have been much more complex and difficult to actually achieve this. So without a doubt, we must join efforts. Without a doubt, we must share experiences much more and see how we can, in a way, capitalize these learnings from one side and the other side to be able to work in a joint manner to also generate more impact. Yes, I absolutely agree. I agree a lot with Carmen. Actually, with the current times we're living, we're seeing that companies that are growing the most are companies that have a certain degree of technology that, well, we're seeing that technology really breaks down barriers. The companies that we are considering to invest in, such as Chile, Argentina, they have a broader vision. They don't have a vision of just staying in that geography. On the contrary, we're investing for their regional growth. And I would also think that in this world, the least important thing are actually borders. We're actually investing abroad and in the region, and we must see this with this vision. It is about the capacity to expand to other regions. And regarding where other entrepreneurs are, and I want to be very honest about this, I think the Southern Cone has the best entrepreneurs that I've seen. I don't know if that is something that, as Carmen has mentioned, they perhaps have navigated between volatile economies to smaller countries. I think that have been able to sustain and have really good entrepreneurs, resilient ones. with a global vision. So I would just leave this session with that. The Southern Cone has some of the best entrepreneurs that I've seen, and I think that we need a broader vision to just think about than just thinking about what happens locally in the country. There will be other type of companies that perhaps are smaller. And as Carmen mentioned of Wigala, which is another fund we created, it's actually a financial entity, not so much a venture capital. And these are credits that can be paid with percentages of sales. But normally, the market that we also want to tackle, aside from having a gender vertical, is to actually embrace smaller companies, to be able to invest in smaller companies that are growing in around 20-30% rate per year, perhaps because they don't have this in their DNA, in their technologies to actually become unicorns. And that I think that in gigantic markets, we're seeking to invest in these, and we are perhaps then abandoning that next tier, which are companies that are also innovative and that are also growing and that have good entrepreneurs, but that perhaps don't have that hunger or that craving to actually become a unicorn that we see or that normally venture capital seek. So I think that there is a huge opportunity of innovating as we are seeing it right now. This is very, very interesting. But once again, I think the topic is about innovating in financial instruments, and I think that is actually what I started talking about. We have all the different circumstances available. We must not adapt just to instruments that are coming from abroad. Yes, I also think that from my standpoint and working a lot in the region, we also see opportunities to work in a collaborative manner. And as we always say in Acrux Partners, we must not reinvent the wheel. If someone else does it and does it well, then we must bring this experience to the countries that still have not experienced this. Sadly, our time is over. I could actually keep on talking for hours with these two celebrities of the investment impact realm. I would like to really thank you for your time and for sharing your experience and the different learnings from years of working in the region. I'd like to also thank ARCAP, CVS, and also Uruguay 21 for your invitation. And I'd like now to invite you to participate in events that are more of the impact investment world, other events that are being carried out in the region, and to be able to come closer and get to know each other. So thank you very much to all, and hopefully we can continue this conversation in other spaces. Thank you.